Hi guys, welcome to the second week's episode of the weekly sports show of the MMA segment with my co-host Jaisel Singh.
Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing the topic of whether YouTube boxing is good or bad for the industry.
Yeah, so we've seen YouTube boxing all the way. I think when was it 2017?
I think
During the Joe Weller
2016 somewhere,
versus
right?
KSI.
Was it
I'm not so
2016?
sure because wherever that started, that's when it started as a proper event. It was a cultural event which did make a difference. It did make a huge impact, in my opinion.
It was a cultural reset. It was a cultural reset.
And what I really want to talk about is Eddie Hearn taking up YouTube boxing and him promoting the Logan Paul versus KSI fight. So, what do you think it did to the sport?
I feel like it brought a lot of attention to the sport because I've been a fan for a long time. I mean, there were days when I used to watch WWE, but then when you discover UFC, you realize that's the real deal, right? Um, and I feel like a lot, I don't know how, I feel like the only benefit in YouTube boxing was it brought a lot of attention to the sport. Because at that time, like I think it was 2018 actually, when the fight happened on 3rd February 2018. So I thought that it brought a lot of attention because everyone was talking about it because it's the first time YouTubers were fighting again against each other, like a proper
Yeah,
boxing match. I mean, there were always like like people were throwing shade at each other all the time, but I feel like this was like an actual event which people wanted to watch, and like all these YouTubers had like over 10 million followers or sorry
even
subscribers.
though even though the fights weren't great, I feel like the audience they brought together weren't boxing fans. They were obviously YouTube fans, so they didn't really know that the fights were quite bad. Like obviously,
Yeah.
looking at the standards, they've only trained for a while, and the fights were quite bad, but it did bring a lot of attention to the sport, especially the KSR versus Logan Paul fight. The numbers were huge, especially for the rematch. They were huge, and to be honest, why Eddie Hearn chose this YouTube boxing and why he wanted to promote it was to bring that attention, to bring a larger audience to the sport, and bringing championship fights under the Logan Paul versus KSI rematch was a smart move because you got to publicize all those fighters because I felt like there were good fights, like the Billy Joe Saunders fight. He dominated his opponent, and I'm guessing his following would have went up. So good, there have been advantages for boxing as a whole. Although we're the MMA segment, we want to obviously do the boxing segment as well. And yeah, it has been good to the sport for the numbers. I think that's it. But when we look at boxing quality wise, I just don't see it. Do you want to
Right.
give us a roundup on the Logan Paul versus KSI rematch?
Yeah, so I feel okay. So there was a lot of conspiracy going around that it was a fix-up, the first fight, because obviously they weren't really throwing as hard as like other boxers. And Fahd and me were just talking earlier, and how many of the fights which took place, they were main fights in a big event, and there were champion boxers who were basically not in the main event, which was pretty shocking for me to realize as well, because I had forgotten about that. But I didn't understand why the fight was as hyped afterwards. Like many boxing fans would have realized that their fight was not of the standard which usually boxing fights are. And in
Yeah,
fact, this might be my personal opinion, but the second fight was kind of worse than the first fight. I don't
way
know.
worse, way worse.
I feel yeah, exactly. Like I feel like there might have been a role where people would have like they would have paid for a specific result because I mean in the fight itself there was like a lot of things which were way worse than the first fight. I mean the second fight they in fact had a longer time to train for, so it's kind of shocking that their fight, the second one, was not as good.
That's really true because I definitely feel like, although this might be an unpopular opinion, I definitely feel like Logan Paul's technique as a boxer is much better than KSI's. I've seen him
Yeah.
train, and his you can see the year and a half of training he's put in. His techniques, especially when he lands the hooks, you know a fighter is really good when you see those perfect hooks and the uppercuts as well, which you saw in the fight. But the mistake he obviously made was not throwing the right hand, and
Yeah.
I really don't understand why. Even though he claimed that he was sick, I felt like it was like it was like an excuse which Deontay Wilder gave after the Tyson Fury rematch.
Exactly,
My
exactly.
costume was heavy. That he shouldn't have done that.
That's
He
such
should
a
have
dumb excuse.
he should have just thrown
Like,
his right hand, and I believe that if he threw his right hand, it would be better. But definitely, he lacked that killer instinct which we see in most boxers, and KSI's heart and dedication. I feel like that's what won him this fight. What do you think?
I mean, if you think about it, now that you brought up the Deontay Wilder thing, I mean, I don't know if this might be a really, really weird analogy, but if you think about it, KSI versus Logan Paul was kind of like a much, much lower version of Deontay Wilder versus Bronze Bomber, right? I mean, Bronze Bomber versus Tyson Fury. I mean, let's be honest here, right? Let's think it to a champion. Like Tyson Fury has, in my opinion, has better technique than Bronze Bomber, right?
Yeah,
Bronze Bomber
definitely
just he
levels
has
above.
power.
Levels above.
Exactly. He just has power. Like his power is what makes him win the fights. And that's something which was very similar in the KSI
Yeah,
Logan Paul
that's
fight,
true.
right? Because KSI he just won with power. He didn't actually have any technique. It was like he was throwing fights in the street, and he in some occasion he might even have looked a bit drunk. He was tripping all around the floor, but the decision went towards KSI, which was
That's
pretty
a
shocking.
good connection though, because I thought about this, but the difference which sets Tyson Fury apart from Logan Paul is obviously Logan Paul did not
Experience.
throw his experience, and he did not throw his right hand. I just don't
Yeah.
understand why. I feel like it would have been a completely different fight if he did. And Tyson Fury has got that heart. He's got the
Yeah.
heart to go out there and knock you out, but his technique is out of this world. So coming back to Logan Paul versus KSI, although there were merits and demerits to the fight, I felt like the boxing fans, the YouTube boxing fans, they have an ideology of the technique which is there in the sport. And like when you idolize KSI as your favorite YouTuber, you feel like everything he throws is the right punch, right? But I genuinely disagree. I think his technique is one of the worst when he does
I
it in a
agree there.
fight. And I just feel like more boxers getting into it, more YouTube boxers getting into it just for the money, just for the trash talk. I'm just not for it, because if your quality isn't up there, you shouldn't be ranked up with professionals. Professionals aren't in your undercard. So I generally feel that more YouTubers shouldn't get into this unless you're trying to go professional. Just
Yeah, that I completely agree. Like, stick to YouTube. You get what I mean? Because
don't.
I mean, like, like I'm not trying to offend anyone here. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are watching who are fans of KSI. In fact, I was. Me and Fahd once were when
Yeah.
like we were in same school, right? Football. Like his videos were good. Sidemen, like a lot. We used to watch them a lot. But I feel like him coming to boxing was like a big shock to me initially when
Yeah.
my friend told me like, "Oh, dude, there's a fight happening." I was like, "What? Like he's boxing now?" Didn't make sense to me. And yeah, I feel like overall YouTube boxing is
Wait, one
just
second.
for entertainment.
You're frozen. Yeah.
Yes. So in general, I feel like YouTube boxing, it's good for bringing in people to watch, but when those people get actual exposure to proper boxing fights, you will notice the difference. You will clearly see the difference. I mean, I get joy just from hearing the sound of Tyson Fury's glove hitting the air. Like that sound is so satisfying. And I'm not trying to make me funny here, but like actually his their technique is so good that
Yeah.
even when he's not hitting something, you can see the impact it would have on a person if he hits someone.
Okay, wait, another pause. Yeah, so definitely the quality has decreased, and this is something which I really get a little offended by, especially when these new YouTubers get, if you're not turning professional, I genuinely want you to stay out of the sport, because you're ruining the name of the sport by just it's become a business for them. It's become a source of money, a source of clout, a source of anything but just learning how to box and learning the sport, because it's such a wonderful sport, such a beautiful sport. And I feel like they're ruining it a little. Like they've had their era, they've had that YouTube boxing era. After the KSI versus Jake Paul fight, which I think will be good. In my opinion, Jake Paul's gonna win
I feel Jake Paul's gonna win that too, to
because
be
of his
honest.
technique, and he's got that
Yeah.
killer instinct with him. Because he's that rash fighter, I feel like he's going to win, and we'll give our predictions once that fight is up. But apart from that, I think that's our take on YouTube boxing. Obviously, we liked it. There were some merits, but I feel like there are more demerits at this point. So that's it from
I
us.
completely, yeah,
Thank you, Jason, for joining us,
no
and
problem.
we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, stay
Bye.
tuned.